A torch asked through the darkness and caught the barn roof with a whump that sent flame climbing the dry shingles in seconds, and Mercy Doyle was already running before she'd finished waking, bare feet slapping the cold porch boards, screaming for the two hands who slept above the tack room. By the time she reached the yard, the whole west side of the barn was a wall of orange light, sparks spiraling up into a sky gone black and starless, and 3 riders sat their horses just beyond the reach of the flames' glow, watching her fight a losing battle with a single bucket of well water as though it were the finest entertainment 2 butts had to offer all year. "Somebody ought to teach you to keep better company, Widow Doyle," one of them called out, and she recognized the voice before she recognized the face. Silas Marrow, who rode for Otis Kane, the land baron who had been trying to buy her out of her claim since the week she'd buried her husband. "Man like Mr. Kane don't take kindly to being told no twice." "Get off my land," Mercy shouted, though her voice with smoke and fury both, and the bucket in her hands felt suddenly, uselessly small against a fire already devouring 6 months of hay and the milk cow she hadn't managed to get loose in time. The riders laughed and wheeled their horses and were gone into the dark before she could get close enough to mark their faces for the sheriff, who would, she already knew from bitter experience, do exactly nothing about it. She stood in the yard with soot on her face and her nightdress scorched at the hem, watching the barn come down timber by timber, and understood with a cold, sinking certainty that Otis Kane meant to burn her off the claim her husband had died proving up, one outbuilding at a time, until there was nothing left for her to defend. She was still standing there an hour later, ash settling like grey snow over the ruin, when a stranger rode up out of the dark leading a second horse, dismounted without asking leave, and set about helping her haul what could still be hauled away from the smouldering wreck before the wind could carry sparks to the house itself. "Name's Wade Sutton," he said, when the worst of it was done and they stood catching their breath in the pale hour before dawn. He was lean and sun-cured, a cowboy passing through by the look of his bedroll and the trail dust on his coat, with quiet eyes that missed nothing, saw the glow from 2 miles off, figured a body could use a second pair of hands. "You figured right." Mercy wiped her face with a sleeve already black with soot, too tired for pride. "Whoever set that fire meant it as a message. I don't suppose it's any of your business, but you might as well know before you decide whether to ride on come morning." He looked at the barn's ruined skeleton, still glowing red in patches, and then back at her. "Reckon I've got no pressing business anywhere in particular, and I don't much care for men who burn a widow's barn in the dark and ride off laughing about it." Something in the flat, quiet way he said it told her he meant every word. Mercy had buried Del Doyle 8 months back, thrown from a green horse he'd been fool enough to buy cheap, had spent every month since fighting to hold the claim by herself against a county full of men who seemed to think a widow alone on good bottom land was an invitation rather than a warning. She had come west with Del 5 years before with nothing but a wagon and a stubborn belief that hard work could build something lasting out of raw prairie, and in the months since his death she had proved up the claim alone, planted and harvested alone, mended fence and birthed a calf alone in the cold dark of a February night with only her own 2 hands to trust. She had thought, by the time the barn burned, that she had already faced down everything the land could throw at her. Otis Kane had sent his lawyer twice with offers so low they amounted to an insult, and when insult hadn't worked, he had apparently decided fire would. Wade Sutton stayed to breakfast, and then stayed to help mend the section of fence the fire had scorched, and by the 3rd day Mercy had stopped expecting him to ride on and started, despite every hard lesson the last year had taught her about counting on anyone, hoping he wouldn't. "You don't have to do this," she told him, watching him set a new post with an ease that spoke of years doing exactly this kind of work. "It isn't your fight." "Didn't ask whose fight it was before I decided I minded seeing it done to you." He straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers, and looked at her with that same quiet directness. "Man who'd burn out a woman alone with no one to stand behind her is a man who needs somebody standing behind her. Simple as that. Kane's got money enough to make most men look the other way. I've got nothing much Kane can take from me. Makes it easier to say no to him than it is for you." She believed him. There was a stillness in Wade Sutton that she recognized, the particular quiet of a man who has already faced down worse than a land baron's hired hands and found the worst thing wanting. In the evenings, once the day's work was done, he took to sitting with her on the porch step while the sky went violet over the bluffs, and little by little she learned the shape of the man beneath the quiet. He had ridden for a Texas outfit as a boy. Lost a younger brother to a stampede, he still blamed himself, for though he'd been barely more than a child himself at the time, and had spent the years since drifting from one ranch to the next, good with a rope and better with a gun, never staying long enough anywhere to be missed when he left. He asked after Dell once, carefully, and listened without interrupting while she told him about the good years and the hard ones, about the calf born alone in the February cold, about the particular loneliness of a woman who had proved she could survive and still woke some mornings wondering what surviving alone was even for. "You've got more grit than most men I've ridden with," he told her one such evening, and there was no flattery in it, only plain facts stated plainly. Cain picked the wrong claim to burn. Cain picked a widow he figured had no one to stand behind her. He figured wrong about that too then. Otis Cain himself came calling 4 days after the fire, driving up in a fine buggy with 2 riders flanking him like an honor guard, and found Wade Sutton sitting on the porch step cleaning a rifle with unhurried, deliberate care, as though he had all the time in creation and meant to use every minute of it. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy," Cain said, not bothering to climb down from the buggy. He was a soft, well-fed man with hard eyes, the kind who had never once done dirty work and saw no reason to start. "Mrs. Doyle and I have business." "Mrs. Doyle's told me plenty about your business," Wade said, not looking up from the rifle. "Barn's still smoking in case you rode past without noticing. Careless accidents happen on a claim run by a woman with no husband to see to repairs. Terrible shame. I'd hate to see it happen again to the house next." The threat hung plain in the warm afternoon air, and Mercy, standing in the doorway, felt her stomach drop even as fury rose hot behind it. Wade set the rifle across his knees, finished at last, and looked up at Cain with an expression gone entirely, dangerously calm. "You'll want to think real careful before you say something like that twice, Mr. Cain. I've got no stake in this claim, and no reason in the world to walk away from watching over it, and I've got considerably less patience than the sheriff you've apparently got in your pocket." Cain's mouth thinned, but something in Wade's stillness made even a man used to buying his way past trouble hesitate. He rapped his cane against the buggy floor and had his driver turn the team without another word, though the look he threw back at Mercy promised the matter was far from settled. It was not settled. 2 nights later, with the moon down and the wind blowing hard off the bluffs, Mercy woke to the sound of horses in the yard and the smell of coal oil, and came out onto the porch to find 3 men, Marrow and 2 others she didn't know, dousing the base of the house itself while a 4th held torches ready to light. "Cain says this is your last warning, Widow Doyle," Marrow called, grinning in the dark. "Sign the paper or sleep in ashes." What happened next happened fast, in the particular blur that only real danger brings. Wade came off the porch roof where he'd been keeping watch every night since the barn burned, dropped between Mercy and the men with a speed that startled even her, and had his revolver level before Marrow's hand had finished reaching for his own. "Drop that torch in the dirt," Wade said, and there was nothing quiet left in his voice now, only iron. "Every one of you. Now." For a long, terrible moment nobody moved, 4 armed men against one, the wind snapping at the torch flames, and Mercy's heart hammering so hard she thought it might be heard over the wind itself. Then one of the strangers, younger than the rest and plainly less committed to Cain's wages than his own hide, let his torch fall hissing into a puddle from the earlier rain, and the others, seeing the nerve go out of the plan, followed one by one until only Marrow stood holding his jaw working with a fury he didn't have the courage to act on alone. "Cain'll hear about this," Marrow spat. "Good," Wade said. "Tell him I said the next man who comes near this house with fire in his hand won't ride away to tell about it. And tell him the sheriff in the next county over owes me a favor, and I mean to call it in about a certain land baron's habit of burning widows off good claims. See how well his money holds up once a federal marshal starts asking after him." It was a bluff, Mercy would learn later, wholly invented on the spot, but delivered with such flat, Unshakable conviction that Marrow's nerve broke entirely, and the four of them rode off into the dark and did not come back that night, nor any night after. Kane, as it happened, had rather more to lose from federal attention than he cared to risk over one stubborn widow's claim, and word reached them within the week, second-hand through the very sheriff who'd done nothing before, that Mr. Kane had decided the Two Butts country wasn't worth the trouble after all, and had turned his interests toward easier land further south. Mercy stood in the ashes of her barn's footprint on a clear, quiet morning some days later, watching Wade set the first new corner post with the same unhurried care he brought to everything, and found herself unable to keep from smiling at the sight of him. "You could have ridden on any day these 2 weeks," she said. "Nobody would have thought less of you for it. Might have thought less of myself." He tamped the earth around the post and straightened, meeting her eyes. "Truth is, Mrs. Doyle, I've been riding through one place after another most of my life without much reason to stop in any of them. Hadn't found a reason worth staying for. Until I saw a woman standing alone in front of her burning barn, too stubborn to run, and thought that might be a reason a man could build something around. It's a hard claim," she said, though her voice had gone soft. "Hard land and harder neighbors, some of them. I've built on harder." He took a step closer, close enough that she had to tip her face up to hold his eyes. "I'm not offering you charity, Mercy. I'm offering to stay, if you'll have me, not as hired help minding your fences, but as a husband standing beside you on land we'd both call ours. I've got little enough to bring you, but a strong back and a stubborn streak to match your own." She thought of Dell, and the year of grief that had felt, for a long while, like it might never lift. And then she thought of the quiet certainty in Wade Sutton's eyes the night he'd stood between her and 4 armed men, without a flicker of doubt in his bearing, and found that the answer had already settled in her heart days before he'd asked the question. It was not the sudden, blazing thing she'd once imagined love might back, when she was young and foolish enough to believe it announced itself all at once. It had crept in quietly, the way morning light finds a room one steady day at a time, until she looked up and found the whole house lit through with it. "I'd have you," she said, "barn raising and all." He smiled then, the first full smile she'd seen from him, and it changed his whole weathered face into something younger, something unguarded. Behind them the new post stood straight and true against the morning sky, the first timber of a barn that would, this time, be raised by neighbors who'd finally stopped being afraid to stand with her, on land that no fire and no man's money would ever take from her again.